I didn't come to church until I was in my late teens, and I found myself struggling with mental illness, depression specifically, in my late teens. So probably 14, 15. My name's Matt Chapirson, and I'm the pastor of Rhapsody Church here in Vancouver, Washington. We meet in the Clark County YMCA. As I started coming to church, and getting around people who were positive, Christians. I would hear things like, well, you don't have to feel that way, that we have the answer, right? And that answer is Jesus. And so I thought, okay, that sounds good. Took me a while to get there. It took me about a year of just coming to church and hearing all of that, until I finally came to a realization that, Jesus is who he says he is, and gave my life to him. But depression was still there. And so there was a lot of dissonance there in my head of like what all these people had told me about how, well, if I come to Jesus, my depression will go away. And yet that wasn't my experience. And so what it left me with was a lot of questions like, okay, well, does Jesus not want to heal me? Is there something wrong with me? Am I doing something? Am I praying wrong? What am I doing wrong? It all came back to me, what am I doing wrong that's not making this happen? And so there was a lot of that dissonance even through my early 20s as well, and hearing some of those similar things from Christians, that mental illness and being a Christian shouldn't be together. I decided not to really reach out for help because so I kept it hidden because I was afraid I'd be judged for it, or that maybe people would believe that I had some sort of hidden sin or something that was causing it. Because that was another thing that was around. A lot of what I heard was either, you're doing something wrong to cause that depression. Depression only comes when you have some sort of hidden sin or something going on in your life. And so I thought, okay, well, that's not necessarily, of course there's things I'm struggling with, but I'm being pretty open about this stuff. I'm talking to people about my struggles. I have accountability. So I'm not hiding it inside or anything, but I'm still feeling this cloud. And so I just decided I'm just not going to say anything about it. And so the only person that really knew was my wife. And so she would see me, crawl into my hole and have a week at a time where I would just be wanting to sleep, wanting to be away from people, not wanting to go out. And I would just tell my friends, I'm just not into it right now. But she knew that there was more to the story there. And so I just kind of tucked it away because of that. In 2009, my wife and I decided to go into foster care because we couldn't have any biological children. So we had two amazing foster kids that we ended up adopting, and both of them had been exposed to a lot of in utero drugs. So their moms either took prescription drugs or, in the case of my son, had taken illegal drugs. And so they had a bunch of things that came along with that. And a lot of those actually we didn't even find out about till later in life. But one of those things for my daughter was autism. And so she is autistic, but also she has been recently diagnosed with bipolar and OCD at age 12, which is, they don't do that unless it's severe enough that they need to figure out medication. So through this journey, I'm going to back up a little bit. Through this journey of finding out, our kids are struggling with different mental illness, whether it be like what I just said with my daughter with bipolar OCD, or whether my son with ADHD. And then my wife was dealing with anxiety. And so all of these things were ramping up I would say in my mid to late 20s, and then even into my early 30s. So all this stuff was happening, and we were in ministry together. And so all of this, I was in a household full of mental illness, but also in ministry. And the dissonance in that was way off the charts, because I'm asking God to heal my kids, asking God to heal my wife, and we're also getting medication for them. And so I'm thinking, okay, what the heck is going on? What? Now I was really in a place where I was like, what am I doing wrong? So fast forward to 2019, when I took over as the lead pastor for Rhapsody, right at the beginning of 2019. Through that year, I was having one of the worst bouts of depression that I'd had since my early 20s. And I was in a place where I didn't know how to communicate this to people. I didn't know if I came out with this to the board, if they were going to fire me. I didn't know how to reconcile my family having all this mental illness, moving my mom in with us, who also struggles with, she has BPD, and so it's just like all this stuff was coming to a head, and it was the summer of 2019. I thought to myself, there's got to be something else that I'm missing, as far as like a piece of this where we need to talk about it, like where the church needs to start talking about this. Because if I'm dealing with this, odds are 100% of my congregation is dealing with this in some way. And so that started the journey of trying to find partners in that, and what is that going to look like? When I first heard about His Heart, it was when I had actually first become pastor of Rhapsody. So it was 2019 in March, and a couple of ladies from the church that were on the leadership team had gone to a His Heart breakfast, and they were telling me about it, and I actually was not into it. I was like, I don't know, like they're all about mental wellness. Like, what is this about? Is this going to be another thing? In my mind, it wasn't so much that I was against what His Heart was doing. It was like two things. I didn't know. I was making a lot of assumptions. And the other thing was, I thought maybe they were going to tell me that I should be mentally well and that I was doing something wrong again. So it was just more of like a stigma in my head where I was just making everyone out to be the bad guy when it came to church and mental wellness. So what first got me to come in and meet Angela for the first time, this was in, I think, September of 2019, was actually my own. So one of the things I let our board know right away when they hired me was I'm not a counselor. And so I just can't be that. It's not my wheelhouse. And so we need to find counselors. And that was one thing that His Heart Foundation offered, was referrals to counseling. And so initially I was meeting with Angela because we needed something. Like we needed counselors, and we needed a resource for that. And so I decided that I would give His Heart a chance and meet with Angela. But when I actually met with her, it actually changed everything, because where I thought that this was all about counseling referral, it was actually God bringing us together to say, hey, Matt, it's okay that you're struggling with mental illness. It's okay that your family's struggling with mental illness. And not only that, you need to share your story and allow people in your church to be able to share their story so that we can actually bring healing. And so the partnership that started that day with His Heart was way more than counseling referrals. That was the initial need, but what I needed out of it was so important. And then what's come out of that for the rest of our people has been exponentially amazing. I personally, after meeting with Angela, decided to go into counseling for myself. So that was the first thing. I recognized that it was okay to have Jesus in a counselor. And so I decided I was going to go and seek counseling out for myself. But I also knew that I needed to let people know what was happening with me. So I made the decision, as hard as it was, and to let the elders of the church know that I was struggling with depression. Now, going into that meeting was terrifying, because I had here on one end, one person on my board is my youth pastor, was my youth pastor, who led me to Jesus. And so going into a meeting there where I'm thinking, okay, I'm about to tell this person I've been struggling with depression since I met Jesus. And I didn't know what he was going to say. And then for the rest of our board, what is that going to mean for me? Are they going to ask me to step down? And that was really a thought. I thought this could be the end, but I know that I can't go on without at least letting people know what's going on. And so I let people know what was happening. I let the board know. And what amazed me was they were 100% supportive. They cried with me that night. They prayed with me that night. They were proud of me for saying what I had said. They were behind me for getting into counseling. In fact, they even paid for some of it. And more than that, it was what started to happen in that meeting was they started to share their own struggles. And it was immediately at that moment that I knew, okay, there's something about me having the courage to share as a pastor what I'm struggling with that allows others to open up. And so we decided to do a series about mental illness and mental health and mental wellness going into Christmas season. This series of messages that we did around mental wellness at the end of 2019 was a turning point for our church. It opened up the door to people just being authentic about who they were. In fact, it brought forth a value that we have at Rhapsody, which is authentic community life. And it actually proved that value. Whereas we'd been hoping for that value at one point, when we did this, we proved it. We proved that we want to be authentic. And so out of that series, we did things like, essentially the idea behind it was we need to break the stigma between the church and mental illness and really allow people to understand that Jesus will heal some, medication he will provide for some, and others will counsel through some of this. Like that was kind of the main three things was and I think I even said that at the beginning of the series was I really believe that some of you will be healed, that you'll be miraculously healed. Some of you will find the medication you've been looking for, and others of you will finally be able to just open up about what you're struggling with. And we found that all of those things were true within this period of time. We brought in one of the counselors from His Heart to do a Q&A with our people, and to start talking about, what does this look like, and just answering those questions for them. And it was healing in a lot of ways. And more than anything, it just allowed our community to know this is a place where I can actually be who I am, and I can find healing. So this whole process of opening up the conversation around mental health in the church at Rhapsody has literally changed the culture from the inside out, from leadership down. It's a different place than it was at the beginning of 2019. And some of the ways that we see that are just people getting into counseling. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing, is that people feel the openness to come to us or come to the leaders and say, hey, can you help me find a counselor? And the beautiful thing is, with our partnership with His Heart, we don't have to help them find a counselor. We can say, we have people we know that we're partnering with that will pray, that will talk to you, that will match you with the perfect counselor for you. And it's just an amazing blessing to be a part of that. So the cool thing was I've been able to say that happened for me. When I called and Angela prayed with me and said, I'm gonna really, really take my time to find the right counselor. That was meaningful because I haven't changed my counselor. I have the same counselor that from the day I started. And I do attribute that to the amount of time spent caring about, making the right fit happen right at the top. Because, it's frustrating to switch counselors and that might still happen. I'm not saying it won't. Sometimes there's just not the right fit. But where we've seen that happen, all the counselors at His Heart that's ever happened are on top of referring to the right counselor. So it's like, it's the perfect just system that they have set up that works so seamlessly and that God's really breathing on in a pretty amazing way. So we've seen that happen a ton. I mean, I think we're upwards of 50, probably pressing 60 referrals since the end of 2019, and it's growing. people are constantly looking for a counselor, looking for ways to just talk about what they're going through. I entered counseling at the end of 2019, and whether you're watching this now in 2021 or later on in 2030, you know that we just went through one of the hardest years of our lives in 2020. And I would say that within the pandemic, within the lockdowns, and what we've seen mental health-wise coming out of that, the struggles that people are having, the mental illness that's been exacerbated in the midst of this kind of thing. I think that had I not gone through counseling when I did, had I not found his heart at the beginning of 2020 and started counseling, I can honestly say, and I was telling our congregation this, I can honestly say I do not know where I would be right now. I probably wouldn't be a pastor. I probably would have quit, because there's no way that if I hadn't begun to process this stuff that I've processed over the last year, it would have destroyed me. And so I would just say that within something like a pandemic or what we've gone through, the relevancy of his heart is 10 times what it was prior to.